Okay, so I want to make one thing clear before I start this video, and that yes, I am in fact drinking coffee. Yes, it's 8:53 at night, but relax, it is decaf coffee. I'm not that crazy. I will be going to bed at a reasonable hour tonight, but regardless of all of that, what I wanted to talk about was I've been thinking a lot about the power of psychology and the power of positive reframing and examining the evidence, as it's referred to by this Harvard paper, which defines positive reframing as thinking about a negative or challenging situation in a more positive way, almost in a way where you receive like very bad information, but you use your mental capacities to recharge it into a positive outlook. And I've found in my life, as someone with high functioning autism, with type 2 bipolar disorder, with a lot of these kind of neurodivergent disabilities and conditions, which lead me to have a much more elevated or aggravated view of the world, if you will. I've found building I call it an emotional toolbox, where I have like a bunch of tools that I can use, such as coping mechanisms, whether it's coping mechanisms for high anxiety situations, like am I in a loud noise environment, in which case do I need to use something like my little earplugs that I use to help me regulate the noise levels so I don't get overwhelmed. Am I in an environment where I'm feeling uncomfortable? Is there something in my environment that's making me feel threatened when there's no need for me to feel threatened? And what I've kind of realized is that in a lot of ways you can build these emotional toolkits very similarly to the way you build your developer toolkits. So like the same way I might obsess over my ZSH configuration or something in NeoVim or my text editor, or I mean even at a mass scale, something like how I set up and configure my Linux distribution, like how my dot files and everything are set up. You can do something very similar with emotions and with your emotional toolkit, because you can develop these set of tools that you apply to different situations. It's just like when the computer, ZSH is a very ZSHRC, that's a very specific part of your configuration, whereas NeoVim is another part of your configuration, your Linux configuration is another part of your setup, and they all combine together to create a toolbox for you for writing code, or doing schoolwork, or creating and editing videos like this one. I've learned that I can do something very similarly with emotional toolboxes. So like examples, like I've previously mentioned, might be, audio overwhelming. What's a coping skill for audio overwhelming? What about, mental overwhelming? I just have a lot going on. What do I need to do to, just get out and, calm myself down? Does the toolkit involve medication? I personally do take medication for my bipolar disorder, and I also take some supplements on top of that. I should clarify, some vitamins, because the term supplements is becoming a very murky water in 2026, especially with peptides and everything that are coming into it. But one of the papers, actually, I don't even know if it's a paper, but they were talking about, this was written by a clinician, and he was talking about the idea of an emotional toolkit where you can select. He basically decided that there were five main tools that you should use in your toolkit, and you can kind of break all of them into new learning and relearning, which is the constant updating, constantly figuring out, okay, I used this toolkit, what went well, what didn't go well, I used this coping skill. There's the critical thinking, so you can kind of take a step back, which I think is the most difficult part of trying to do this kind of toolkit building for emotional skills, is just being able to take a step back and analyze the situation. Because when you're in the moment, you naturally start to panic. You're like, I need a solution now, I want a solution now. What do you mean I have to take a step back and just feel it? It's an uncomfortable, you're in an uncomfortable situation, and you just want to take a step back from it all. It's perfectly understandable. So it's very interesting scenario where you have to kind of take a step back and be like, I'm going to float in these feelings and thoughts for a bit and just kind of see where I get out. Then there's the self-analysis where you're trying to figure out, like, what's the correct counter to the situation that you're currently in. Is it an audio overwhelming versus is it like a physical overwhelming? Like, if people, I don't want to say touch you inappropriately because that obviously has sexual connotations. But a lot of people with autism, they don't prefer being like touched or like brushed against or something like that. It's just a sensory overload for a lot of autistic people. So something like that might be like, is that the situation? Do I just need to be vocal about, hey, don't bump into me, don't touch me, don't do any of that. Then there's the concept, the conscious choice. There's, body tools, like tools for like, base for building yourself into, do I need to do breath work? Do I need to focus on meditation? Do I need to do some sort of like physical step back, like stepping out of the situation, which is causing that anxiety? I mean, for me, a great example was I volunteered at a poetry festival at my university, and it was a very overwhelming situation. Everyone was very packed in together. It was a very high traffic area, and there was a lot of noise going on, and I just started getting really overwhelmed. So I just knew that I needed to step outside of the situation, just take a step out, take a couple deep breaths, and be like, you know what? I just need to get out of here for a bit. There's also such things as, environmental tools, which it kind of leads into what I was talking about, like environmental tools, where you're able to like, focus more on, I think the best way to put it would be like, is it the environment? Is it the people I'm around? Is it the place I'm in? Is it the things I'm surrounded with? And then, of course, there's the other, toolkits that can be used. The mental aspects of it, the physical aspects of it. Do you have some sort of safety toolkit? It's an age-old, it's a timeless joke, but the weighted blanket for autistic people, that is a real coping skill that actually activates for a lot of autistic people, because it feels like a hug, but they're not dealing with the sensory overload of a hug. But I've always thought that, it's kind of like how us developers, we're never fully satisfied with our dot files. We constantly are tweaking them. We're constantly tuning them. We need to focus. We need to learn to build our emotional toolkits the same way, because it allows us to learn how to be emotionally healthy and emotionally regulate ourselves. If we're constantly taking in the new information and the new scenarios as they're being presented, and we're like, okay, what can I do to improve the situation? As long as you're focusing on doing that, I think that as a whole, it allows us to not only be healthier in mind, but I think it actually allows us to be closer to, in my opinion, the quote, ideal man, where it's someone who is emotionally healthy. It's someone who doesn't let his emotions control him, but it's also someone who doesn't shut out his emotions, which is kind of the other major thing I wanted to talk about. I beg you, do not fall into the stereotype that I fell into for quite a while, where, and when I say quite a while, I'm referring to years, where you think that you just have to constantly be locked in, which means that you're building your emotional toolkit not to actually help you cope with situations and learn how to process what's going on, but to more weed out the negative feelings. You're trying to never feel negative emotions again. You're trying to emotionally cut yourself off, so you never feel an emotion that might distract you from your work. And for someone like me who's bipolar, that's something that I fought against for a very long time, because I thought that's how normal people acted. But as I've gotten older and in my own personal journey, I don't even want to say as I've gotten older, I'm 23, but as I've continued in my personal journey, you're not living when you're constantly hyper locked in like that. You need to have time to be able to just take a step back, feel the feelings and just enjoy what's going on. I haven't gotten that much work done this week. I've spent most of my spare time either wandering around the town I live in, just walking around, listening to music, doing little projects that don't actually have any real effect on my life, or playing video games. Like, I mean, you can't see it right now, but I'm literally using my PlayStation. As a little mount right now for my camera, because I don't have a proper tripod, but I've been using my PlayStation all the time. And that's okay. We need to get it into our heads that that's okay. Because if you're just living your life so optimized, because if you live your life so optimized that you never can like take a deep breath, you're not living for yourself anymore. If you think you're living for yourself, I'm sorry, dude, you're lying to yourself. You're kind of living for the final boss, you know? I think a lot of us who either were in the self-improvement community or have left the self-improvement community, there was a recognition that just a constant focus on needing to be locked in and constantly doing this stuff. We built this lie for ourselves where we thought that what we were doing was living for ourselves, and the reality was that we weren't living for ourselves, because for a great majority of people in that community, I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying a majority of them, they were really doing it because they just wanted to learn how to like constantly get so locked in they could make money, so they could be impossible to fail. And I'm not going to get into the entire is self-improvement a good or bad thing. That's not at all what I'm referring to. But you're not living for yourself if you are so focused on being locked in and optimizing everything towards being locked in. You're not living for yourself anymore at that moment. You're literally living for the dollar. You're living for the tax guy. You're living for your boss. You're focusing all of your energy to optimize a life that you don't enjoy. And is that really what you want? So build your emotional toolkit. But just like how developers constantly are fine-tuning their toolkit and they don't immediately bail onto the next big tool, or they immediately throw it all away and start over again every time something new comes and happens, just learn to keep adapting and learn to keep building and let your toolkit evolve with you, because I think that's when you actually begin to connect more with human spirituality. Because the moment that you're able to like handle an emotion, be like, I don't know what this emotion is, I don't know how to handle it, but you know what, that's okay. That's the moment you begin living. Thanks for watching.